Among the thousands of records in this library, documenting the history of an eventful time, are other materials that tell the story of the library itself, specifically the roles President and Mrs. Johnson played in getting it started and shaping its mission. It's an important story. The elements are all here in documents and film and recollections, but they've never been put together in cohesive form, and that's why I'm here. My years of service in this library are long over, but because that service stretched over so many years, I know this story, so I'm back now briefly to put it together for the library's archive. 1 month after President Johnson's inauguration in 1965, the LBJ Library was born, or at least conceived. Lady Bird Johnson noted the event in her diary. At 5 o'clock, she recorded, "I had a meeting with Clark Clifford and Bill Heath on that phantom that I want to clothe with flesh, the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library. Bill presented us with a proposal that is almost too great to comprehend. The University of Texas wants Lyndon to deposit his papers there, and they propose land, a building, and a school of public affairs to be named after him." The Johnsons accepted the offer. Mrs. Johnson enthusiastically took on the task of supervising the early planning, and within a month, she was recording in her diary, "My day was divided among work on the Presidential Library, the Diplomatic Corps, and the 10th and last congressional reception." To become familiar with presidential libraries, she visited the 4 that then existed. One of her observations was particularly pertinent. "The scholars come in one door and the public comes in another," she said, "and the public never sees what brings the scholars." From that observation came the main exhibit in the LBJ Library, Display of the Archives. She formed a committee to consider how the administration could best be depicted in exhibits.
The treaty room is enchanting. Its deep, rich tones and sense of organized clutter make it pure Victorian. I remember it best as a room wonderfully conducive to work. One of the projects which engaged us in this room was planning for the LBJ Presidential Library on the campus of the University of Texas.
The president's first major contribution came when he discovered that there was no provision in the library's plan for a replica of the president's office in the White House, the Oval Office. He insisted that the plans be revised to include one. Toward the end of his administration, he made a recording which would add significantly to the experience of future visitors to the library.
"The man who sits in this chair sits in the chair that's been occupied by less than 40 men in the long history of this great republic. He is selected by the will and by the votes of a majority of the citizens of this republic. He must execute the philosophy and the policies of the people of this nation, regardless of his own personal feelings from time to time. He is the executor of the will of the people of this nation, and he carries upon his shoulders day and night a burden that always seems, at least to him, too much to carry, but only for him to carry. No president ever came to this office on a platform of doing what was wrong. Most of us have made some decisions that were wrong, and as we leave office, in a good many instances, most of the people seem to feel that most of the things we've done have been wrong. But every man who's ever occupied this office or sat at this desk or reclined in this chair has been dedicated to doing what he believed was for the best interest of the people of this country. I'm utterly convinced that when any man takes the oath of office as president, he is determined to do what is right as God gives him the wisdom to know the right.
When the library was dedicated, the president spelled out its basic purpose.
So it's all here. The story of our time with the barcode. A president sees things from a unique perspective. No one can share his responsibility. No one can share the scope of his duties or the burdens of his decisions. There is no record of a mistake or an unpleasantness or criticism that is not included in the files here.
He made it clear that he meant those words. He wanted all the papers open for research as quickly as possible. And he wanted the library to be liberal in determining what papers to open. In other words, to close as few as possible. And he made it quite and colorfully clear that he wanted no special effort made to go easy on him. Good men have been trying to protect my reputation for 40 years, he told me, and not a damn one has succeeded. What makes you think you can? He wanted the exhibits depicting his administration to show the controversies as well as the successes. That was a very controversial period, he said, and I don't want another damn credibility gap. He personally selected a hostile postcard he wanted displayed. Making all the documents available for research, creating exhibits for the general public, these are the core activities of all presidential libraries, and President Johnson set the guidelines for both. But he wanted more for the library that bears his name. Mrs. Johnson spelled it out. Lyndon, she said, had a high hope for this library, one that I share with him to the fullest. It was that this institution would serve us all, would serve the nation, by making a contribution to the great problems of the day, that it would draw here concerned men and women who would be interested, and more than interested, aroused by the issues of our time, and who would broaden the horizons of our understanding with their arguments, their questions, and their convictions. It did not take long for LBJ to put that concept into action. A week after the library was dedicated, he asked me what we planned to do next. By then, I knew pretty well, in general, what he wanted, so I suggested that we might select education as the first group of papers to open, and at the same time hold a conference on the future of education. He immediately put the LBJ brand on that idea. It would take money, and he knew the government would not pay for it. That's what we have a foundation for, he said. But I was concerned that there might still be a problem. The other presidential libraries hadn't done this kind of thing, and I wasn't sure we had the authority. He had the answer to that. He told me to invite the head man, the archivist of the United States, to make the welcoming speech. And he said, tell him you'll write his speech for him. I did. Dr. Burt Rhodes, the archivist, came. He delivered the welcoming address I wrote with its significant passage, answering as a policy statement the question of the library's authority.
Presidential libraries would be fulfilling their purpose if they did nothing more than preserve and provide access to the papers they contain. This is their basic reason for existence. But their charters are broad, and their possibilities for service unlimited. Intellectual centers such as these are inherently dynamic institutions, constantly probing as searchlights for new and exciting ways to advance scholarship.
And the presidential libraries now had a broad new charter. The second symposium on civil rights took place the month before President Johnson died. He was enthusiastic about it, as he made clear to the students at the LBJ school.
On December the 10th and 11th, we're going to meet here with the leaders who are responsible for bringing about a changed atmosphere in this country, about who can vote and about who can eat and where and who can sleep and how and who can live in a home and so forth. Those are simple laws. They make up the civil rights program of the 60s. There are 1 million papers that went into those bills, 1 million memos, 1 million conversations. The sum total add up to 1 million. 1 million pleas with the president personally, and by the gardener also. And we're going to open all those private memos. We're going to see what I said to Adam Clayton Powell and what he said to me, and what I said to Martin Luther King and what he said to me, and what I said to the Congress. And I never was suspected of being very dramatic or colorful or charismatic individual. But when I looked the Congress in the eye and said, "We shall overcome," it was very significant to me that some of my dearest friends with whom I had associated through the years, who thought I was just another crooked Confederate, sat on their hands and wouldn't applaud. But I'm very proud to say it was a matter of weeks until I signed the Civil Rights Bill under the Abraham Lincoln statue in the rotunda of the Capitol of the United States. That's a great event for you if you're interested in not just in yourself, but in justice for your fellow man. If you're interested in making this a better and more perfect union, if you're interested in doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, that's going to be an exciting meeting. We're going to have all the black leaders of that time come here and participate. We're going to have the man responsible for the Brown decision in 1954, the then Chief Justice Supreme Court, grand old man of American democracy, Republican. Earl Warren, without whose courage and brain and effort and gifted political talents, we probably wouldn't have had any of these statues. He will keynote these. Ralph Ellison, the noted black writer, Roy Wilkins, head of the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, the first black man to ever serve on the Supreme Court, a man who started out, I met him right here at the University of Texas because they wouldn't let Herman Sweat, a black boy, come to school. His people paid taxes always, and they worked hard and went to church on Sunday. And they participated in the burdens of government just as the whites did, but Herman Sweat couldn't come in this great university. And Thurgood Marshall came here and started a lawsuit, went to the Supreme Court, that permitted blacks in this country to go to state sport school. All of that talent's going to be here.
Many of the civil rights leaders of the time were here. The victories they had all worked together to achieve gave the occasion an air of celebration. But the president took the occasion to spell out the direction he wanted the symposium to take.
I don't want this symposium to come here and spend 2 days talking about what we have done. The progress has been much too small. We haven't done nearly enough. For myself, I believe it's time for all of us in government and out to face up to the challenge. We must review and reevaluate what we've done and what we're doing. In specific areas, we must set new goals and new objectives and new standards. Not merely what we can do to try to keep things quiet, but what we must do to make things better. So let's be on with it.
After the president died, Mrs. Johnson took over the reins. Her touch was light, but her leadership was critical, and her commitment equaled that of the president's. She met regularly with library supervisors to review plans and activities. Every aspect of the library's life was of interest to her. But always of special interest were the concerned men and women she had cited when she declared her and the president's high hope for the library. The concerned men and women who would be interested and aroused by the issues of our time. Finally, there are the telephone tapes, the secret recordings of the president's phone conversations in the White House.
Hello? Hello?
It's Bunchapter on the line.
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Gordon?
Yes?
Lyndon Johnson?
Oh, yes, Mr. President. How are you?
I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner or something.
No. We finished some time ago.
Gordon, we see relatively few people come through the president's office here.
Yes.
But all of them want to see where the president worked, just as much as they want to see where the president is born when they come to our little house. That's one of the basic things. And if we could, that's the one thing I want. I'd like to have as near a reproduction as finances and architectural requirements would permit. Now, I don't say it's got to be 18 feet high or 14 or got to be 38 feet long. Well, we might have a little card on the door and say this is not an exact reproduction or something, but I'd like for it to be such that say where they get an impression that here's where the president worked, because they all want to see that. They all want to, that's what they come to see.
He put a 50-year restriction on their release. Mrs. Johnson supported the library's belief that the restriction should be removed. Now they are among the library's most important holdings, and they have added immeasurably to history's understanding of the 36th President of the United States.
But I would like to venture to suggest that the more time later historians spend with Lyndon Johnson tapes, the more companionable he will become. For we see in stark contrast to the small, vindictive man so often revealed in the Richard Nixon tapes, that the Lyndon Johnson that emerges from his takes is a gigantic figure, an unforgettable figure, full of enormous passion, full of desire to make life better for every American, using his unbridled energy, his wit, and his humor to do everything he could for the people he loved. Focus on any one of those issues in those tapes, and Lyndon Johnson comes fully to life.
Another thing that I think historians oftentimes ask about presidents is, how deep is their commitment? If they give wonderful speeches that sound lovely on the outside, do they say the same things once they put down the speeches and go back into the back room and speak from the gut rather than from a speech text? To listen to Lyndon Johnson during those first 9-11 months on issues, as Doris and Haynes were both mentioning, like civil rights and poverty, it leaves you in no doubt that this was someone for whom these were not just intellectual issues, things that he wanted to get through Congress in order to burnish his record. This was someone who felt these things in the pit of his stomach and was willing to take monumental risks to get these things through a Congress that in 1964 was much different from the one he faced 1 year later.
They carry his voice. They represent her foresight in making that voice heard. In this, as in so much in this library, their contributions give this institution its special strength and distinction.